The House will be in order. The prayer will be offered by our guest chaplain, Reverend Sean Raftis from the St. Charles Borromeo Church in Whitefish, Montana. You may proceed, Reverend. Thank you.
Let us pray. Loving Heavenly Father, we thank you for blessing us with faith, hope, and love. We are especially thankful for those who defend and protect our nation and our veterans who are with us, and those who gave their lives to deliver us from evil and to protect our priceless freedoms we treasure. Please guide us so that we can know and live the good, the true, and the beautiful. Please forgive our sins and cleanse us with your infinite mercy so that we can live virtuous lives. We beg you that you continuously bless this Congress so that we all may work for the common good to deliver life, liberty, and happiness, so that we and all citizens can fulfill Psalm 22 to proclaim to a people yet unborn the deliverance you have brought. May all these noble men and women in Congress who serve here now continue to be blessed with joyful resolve to contribute to the greatest good, you, our Heavenly Father, and may God bless America. Amen.
Amen. The chair has examined the journal of the last day's proceedings and announces to the House the approval thereof. Pursuant to Clause 1 of Rule 1, the journal stands approved. The Pledge of Allegiance will be led by the gentleman from New York, Mr. Tonko.
I ask that we all join together as we pledge allegiance to our flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Without objection, the gentleman from Montana, Mr. Zinke, is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Father Sean Raftis is originally from Spokane, Washington. He's the son of James and Catherine Raftis. He has a brother, of course, Pat. He's a kid who grew up in a fine town in Spokane. He attended Gonzaga Prep and Gonzaga University in his hometown. He studied and taught at Edward Morrow School of Communication at Washington State University, also known as the Cougars. He earned his master's degree while teaching at Morrow School. Father started his studying for Catholic priesthood in 1995, studying philosophy at Loyola University in Chicago and theology at Boston School of Theology and Ministry. He was ordained in 2005 and is a priest for the Diocese of Helena, Montana, in western Montana, and serving at the Cathedral of St. Helena, Holy Cross in Townsend, and I'm proud to say he is the pastor at my church in Whitefish, Montana. I'm honored here to introduce Father Raftis.
The chair will entertain up to 5 further requests for 1-minute speeches on each side of the aisle. For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, request unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I rise before you today to recognize the annual Du Bois Area YMCA Polar Plunge, which takes place in Clearfield County. The event, which occurred on Saturday, February 3rd, has taken place for the last 13 years and has raised thousands of dollars for the YMCA Strong Kids campaign. With their help, children are able to participate in YMCA activities at a much lower cost. Despite the cold weather, 58 brave participants dove into Treasure Lake. The ages of the participants ranged from 12 to 82 years old. The plunge initially began in 2011 when it was founded by Du Bois YMCA Executive Director Dan Dowling. I'd like to take this time to continue to show my support for all those who participated, as well as the Du Bois YMCA for their gracious efforts. Without these fundraising events, those who are less fortunate would not be able to access these very important youth programs. Keep up the great work. Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I yield back the balance of my time.
For what purpose does the gentleman from New York seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I seek unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you. It is with great pride that I congratulate the remarkable team from Farnsworth Middle School in Guilderland, New York, in New York's 20th Congressional District, on its outstanding achievement in winning grand prize at this year's National Discover E Future City competition. These students, together with educator Kelly Werner and volunteer mentor Jennifer Smith, showed extraordinary innovation, dedication, and skill in crafting their future city. Their vision and hard work exemplify the value of STEM education and showcase the limitless potential of our youth. Congratulations to the Dutchman Ducks team and to everyone involved in this impressive accomplishment. And thank you for representing our great capital region with excellence on this national stage. I wish you all success in your future endeavors as you continue to electrify our world with your ingenuity and your passion. Let's hear it for today's leaders amongst the young people in this country.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Iowa seek recognition?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I ask that for 1 minute remarks and to extend a revise.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise today to celebrate Hawkeye superstar and West Des Moines native Caitlin Clark. Friends, March is upon us, and the madness is real. As we look forward to the Big Ten Women's Tournament already underway, we have a phenomenon coming from the heart of the heartland, Miss Caitlin Clark. After surpassing the all-time scoring record in women's basketball in February, Caitlin became the NCAA Division I all-time leading scorer for both men and women's basketball. In Iowa, wins over Ohio State on Sunday, Caitlin reached an astounding record of 3,685 career points. And friends, she's just getting started. Caitlin is a leader both on and off the court. And it serves that she is a role model for young women across our state and the country. As a dad of 5 young daughters, our babysitter even helped make Caitlin Clark who she is by constantly getting dunked on by Caitlin Clark in high school. And so with that, Miss Liza Sutton, you, the coaches, the fans, the team, and the family are what make Caitlin Clark and Iowa so proud of you today. Thanks for all you're doing, and most importantly, as Iowa sets its focus on the Big Ten tournament in March, join me in congratulating Caitlin for what she's done and what she'll continue to do. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield the remainder of my time.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Ohio seek recognition? Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, in the 9th District of Ohio, the American Cancer Society's Discovery Shop in Sylvania, Ohio, in Lucas County, won the Denise Noel Award for bringing in the most sales out of any location in our entire country. The award is presented to a person or group by the American Cancer Society that has made significant contributions to the Discovery Program. The Discovery Shop, which is a volunteer-run thrift store, sells donated clothes, household goods, antiques, collectibles, jewelry, artwork, and small furniture. Purchases at these fine establishments help the American Cancer Society fund advocacy, research, and patient support programs to improve the lives of cancer patients and their families. Anita Schuler, the manager of the Sylvania location, attributes the store's success to the involvement of the community and the dedication of its volunteers. Volunteers at the store credit Ms. Schuler's leadership and her ability to create and maintain a positive atmosphere for the award. In this home away from home, for many, there is not one person that does not go above and beyond for their Sylvania and our broader community. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Congratulations to Ms. Schuler and the entire team, and I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from New York seek recognition?
I seek unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute to rise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, I rise today to honor a very special guest joining me in D.C. here in the House Gallery today, Mr. Steve Sutton, a retired social studies teacher from Red Hook, New York. But he's not just any teacher. He was, in fact, mine, and the man responsible for my desire to enter into public service. Mr. Sutton's passion for government inspired me to get involved, leading me to student council, mock trial, and the presidential classroom program here in Washington. Later, I served as youngest mayor in America, state assemblyman, county executive, and now a member of Congress. And one of the proudest moments for me was calling Mr. Sutton on election night to tell him that I'd be serving here in Congress, the same institution we studied in his classroom. Now, not everyone will pursue a career in public service, but everyone is capable of achieving their version of success, and that's why teachers like Steve Sutton matter. They push us through our unique talents to achieve our dreams. Mr. Sutton helped me realize my life's calling to make a difference. And so to you, Mr. Steve Sutton, and all the teachers like you nationwide, we are so very grateful. And with that, I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Virginia seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I ask for permission to address the House for 1 minute to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection. The gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, I rise today to celebrate the life of Captain Charlie Griff Griffin. When I grew up there working on the Outer Banks in the fishing community, I remember Griff vividly. Griff was a personality. Griff was bigger than life. He loved fishing. He loved the fishing community. He loved everything about what was going on there on the Outer Banks. I remember his infectious laugh. I remember his voice on the radio, as you see here, saying, "Got him on." Griff was indeed a friend to all in the fishing community, and he will be sorely missed. He leaves behind a community of fishermen whose lives were touched by his kind soul and his kind words. We looked at him as a friend and as a mentor. I pray that God brings peace to his loved ones. I know his love for his son Jake and his love for his dogs, including Lelia, who was tragically lost on the same day as Griff. We know it's a difficult time for folks in the fishing community there in the Outer Banks, but we know that his life will live on forever. He'll be remembered and cherished. Rest in peace, Griff.
For what purpose does the gentleman from North Carolina seek recognition?
That's unanimous consent to address the House for up to 1 minute, revise and extend my remarks as needed.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, I rise today to remember the life of Chad Dunn, who tragically passed away in a boating accident in Oregon and North Carolina this past week. He was taken far too soon. As a member of the fishing community, Chad was beloved by those who knew him, as well as his passion for the sea. Whether casting lines into the ocean's depths or navigating the tumultuous waters of life, Chad approached every challenge with courage and grace. Life is precious, and Chad seized every moment to live his life to the fullest. His spirit of adventure serves as a reminder for all of us to do the same. While the sea may have claimed Chad's physical existence, his spirit remains in our hearts, our minds, especially those in the boating community and fishing community of Oregon Inlet and the Outer Banks. I pray that God brings peace to his loved ones in this very difficult time. May his life be forever remembered, cherished, and beloved for those who loved him and knew him. Rest in peace, Chad. I yield back the balance of my time.
Pursuant to House Resolution 1052 and Rule 18, the Chair declares the House in the Committee of the Whole on the State of the Union for further consideration of H.R. 2799. Will the gentlewoman from Minnesota, Ms. Fischbach, kindly take the chair?
The House is in the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union for further consideration of the bill H.R. 2799, which the clerk will report by title.
A bill to make reforms to the capital markets of the United States and for other purposes.
When the Committee of the Whole rose on Thursday, March 7, 2024, Amendment Number 5, printed in Part B of the House Report 118-407, offered by the gentleman from California, Mr. Sherman, had been disposed of. Order to consider Amendment Number 6, printed in Part B of the House Report 118-407. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Pennsylvania seek recognition?
Madam Chair, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 6, printed in Part B of House Report number 118-407, offered by Ms. Houlihan of Pennsylvania.
Pursuant to House Resolution 1052, the gentlewoman from Pennsylvania, Ms. Houlihan, and a member opposed each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Pennsylvania.
Madam Chair, I rise today to urge my colleagues to support my very straightforward amendment to protect small businesses and community banks in the wake of financial crisis, and I want to thank Ranking Member Waters for the opportunity to lead on this issue. I want to take this chamber back 1 year ago, to the collapse of Silicon Valley Bank that sent our financial system into disarray. In 48 hours' time, one of the largest U.S. banks failed, impacting customers, investors, businesses, and stockholders across our nation. Silicon Valley Bank's failure subsequently led to the collapse of Signature and Silvergate banks in rapid succession as well, making this crisis one of the most significant banking failures in the United States history. After moments like these, it's important that Congress and key agencies like the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission fully understand the scope and impacts to our economy. Transparency and accountability are essential to instill confidence in our capital markets and to prevent another crisis from tanking our economy in the same way. In conducting the analysis, we must not only examine and understand the impact of the broader macroeconomy, but we must also make a concerted effort to understand the effects on small businesses and on community banks that drive our main streets. According to the Federal Reserve data, deposits at smaller community banks dropped by $120 billion in the week following the collapse. This is especially troubling when we consider that smaller banks hold approximately 36% of our business loans, according to the FDIC. So in other words, community banks took a hit in the immediate aftermath of the failure, which is especially concerning considering the high number of Main Street business owners that utilize them. Our federal government has a responsibility to gather data on exactly how this crisis impacted our mom and pop shops and the community banks that they depend on for crucial lines of capital. And we must ensure that we learn from and take action to prevent the missteps and events of the past as well. So that's why I'm offering this very straightforward and very common sense amendment that ensures that the SEC's Advocate for Small Business Capital Formation study the effects of the collapse of the Silicon Valley Bank on community banks and small business lending alike. The Advocate, whose job it is to advance the interests of small businesses and their investors, would then be required under this amendment to provide Congress and the SEC with a report of its findings and recommendations. 1 month after the Silicon Valley Bank's collapse, I had the chance to meet with a group of local Pennsylvania bank leaders, including Customers Bank, Presence Bank, and First Resource Bank, located in my district. Each one of these banks was deeply concerned about their ability to serve the small businesses that drive their economy, create and sustain jobs, and fund the American dream. I specifically recall the CEO of Customers Bank, located in my 6th congressional district, sharing the account of the fear that small businesses had when this happened. They were concerned that they would not be able to meet payroll and other obligations. So this conversation and outreach from many, many other concerned businesses in my community is why I'm putting forward this amendment. Because at the end of the day, this is jobs and livelihoods that are at stake. I want to also be clear and address a falsehood. This amendment does not attempt to imply that the SEC regulates banks. This amendment clearly speaks to the responsibilities of the Advocate for Small Business Capital Formation to advance the interests of small businesses and their investors. It will allow Congress to take the requisite action to protect small businesses and community banks ahead of future financial crises and help them be more secure and more resilient. Once again, I urge my colleagues, both Democrat and Republican, to support my straightforward and very common sense amendment to protect our main streets and to ensure accountability and transparency in our financial system. I yield the remainder of my time to Ranking Member Waters, and I thank her for her continued leadership.
Should go right away then? Gentlewoman from California is recognized. She yielded her time. What are we doing? California is recognized. She yielded the remainder of her time.
I would like to thank my colleague from Pennsylvania for offering this important amendment, which mandates the SEC report on the impact Silicon Valley Bank's collapse has had on local banks and small business lending. Our committee's previous examination of the 2023 banking crisis, while informative, should not be the end of the story. With the expertise of its talented and knowledgeable staff, the SEC can supplement our reporting and is sure to provide further valuable insights into what exactly happened and how regulators and lawmakers can avoid this from occurring again in the future. So I urge my colleagues to vote yes, and I yield back to the gentlewoman from Pennsylvania.
I reserve.
Gentleman.
Madam Chair, I claim...
May I correct that? It is my understanding that the gentlelady from Pennsylvania's time has expired. I was just told. So for what purpose does the gentlelady from Missouri rise?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I claim the time in opposition, and I am indeed opposed to this amendment.
The gentlewoman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Republicans agree that the failure of Silicon Valley Bank and other institutions last March should be studied to better understand their impact on lending and community banks. That's why the Financial Services Committee devoted much of last spring and summer to holding a series of bipartisan hearings to better understand the bank failures and their consequences. We also advanced a package of legislation in response to the bank failures. However, studies about lending and community banks should be done by banking regulators. Such a study is far outside the expertise of the SEC and especially the advocate for small business capital formation. H.R. 2799 does not include a study on banking services for venture funds. However, the focus of our study is to better understand venture capital and the potential obstacles preventing their growth or hindering their ability to serve the entrepreneurs that they invest in, especially for smaller venture funds outside of major financial hubs. The study required by this amendment is materially different. The SEC is very experienced in regulating the studying venture funds, but bank lending and community banks are far outside the SEC's remit. While I appreciate my colleagues' interest in better understanding the implications of the bank failures on lending, this is not the proper package for this amendment. For those reasons, I urge my colleagues to reject this amendment, and I support the underlying legislation. And, Madam Chair, I yield back.
Thank you. The gentlelady yields back. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentlewoman from Pennsylvania. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it.
Chair, I ask for the ayes and nays, please.
Does the gentlewoman request a recorded vote?
Yes.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of the Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentlewoman from Pennsylvania will be postponed. In order to consider Amendment Number 7, printed in Part B of the House Report 118-407, does the gentlewoman from Michigan seek recognition?
I have an amendment at the desk made in order by the rule.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 7, printed in Part B of House Report number 118-407, offered by Ms. Tlaib of Michigan.
Pursuant to House Resolution 1052, the gentlewoman from Michigan, Ms. Tlaib, and a member opposed will each control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Michigan.
I yield as much time as I may consume. We all know there's incredibly important issues that are facing many of our families. And one of them is the rise in just uncontrollable corporate greed that we continue to see. You want your child to sit next to you on an airplane? Expect a fee. Cancel your bill, your cable bill early? Expect a fee. Pay your credit card late. In Michigan, an average credit card late fee from big banks are more than $20. Sadly, even the medical industry imposes hidden costs and surprise bills. Collectively, these junk fees cost our residents billions of dollars each year, Madam Speaker. The telecommunications industry alone takes in an estimated $28 billion from fees annually from our residents. This is wrong. It's actually sick. We must push back against corporate greed. Consumers should not have to deal with hidden charges and fees. None of my residents should have to deal with this, especially as the rising cost of services and fees continue to happen on top of these hidden fees. In this chamber, we should all make sure that any law we pass does not support companies that exploit consumers. It's so important. My amendment is simple. It ensures that any exemptions or benefits provided in this act may not apply to companies that impose the junk fees on our residents. That's it. The act makes it easier for companies that employ gig workers to pay them in equity in lieu of real salary. It exempts small issuers from disclosing basic financial information like revenues and expenses. It expands exemptions for venture capital funds, which played a significant part in the Silicon Valley Bank failure. Regulation on the private funds industry would revert back to pre-Dodd-Frank, allowing such funds to avoid supplying the SEC with basic information. Such Wall Street giveaways we know are problematic and debatable. What's not debatable is that this body would relax or roll back regulations meant to protect our retirees, and that at the same time reward the companies that are literally negatively impacting our hardworking families with hidden fees and surprise costs. It's maddening. I urge my colleagues to protect consumers, to promote transparency. They deserve to know by adopting my amendment, which would ensure that those companies that benefit from this act do not also profit from imposing junk fees on our residents. I yield back the remainder of my time to my good colleague from Pennsylvania.
The gentlelady from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Rep. Tlaib, for yielding your time. Madam Chair, I rise today in opposition to H.R. 2799, the Expanding Access to Capital Act of 2023, because it would remove critical safeguards against fraud and abuse in our financial markets at the expense of everyday Americans. This bill represents a set of policies that would deregulate Wall Street and further enrich the wealthiest of our communities, all while reducing investor confidence and protections for retirees and for mom-and-pop investors. We already see the practices of private equity funds making single-family homes unaffordable and increasing the number of rural hospitals inaccessible. The last thing we need to do is to make this situation worse. So it is for this reason, at the appropriate time, that I will offer a motion to recommit this bill back to committee. If the House rules permitted, I would have offered the motion with an important amendment to this bill. Instead of enabling bad actors, my amendment would protect the privacy of women utilizing in vitro fertilization by prohibiting the Securities and Exchange Commission from requiring a business that provides IVF treatments from disclosing any personal identity information on the individual who's receiving the treatment, the medical or support personnel who are providing that treatment, or the clients of such businesses. In the Dobbs decision, we saw the Supreme Court tear away our constitutional rights to privacy. All Americans, regardless of where they live, should be able to access assisted reproductive technologies that they need to start and to grow their families, including IVF, without the fear that their personal information will be shared. Our medical providers deserve to be able to do their jobs, to help patients to make best decisions for their own circumstances without fear of retribution. At the end of the debate, I will insert into the record the text of this amendment. I hope that my colleagues will join me in voting for the motion to recommit, and I yield back to the Representative Tlaib.
Does the gentlewoman from Michigan reserve, or?
I reserve the balance of my time, but Madam Chair, may I inquire the balance of my time?
Gentlelady has 30 seconds remaining. For what purpose does the gentlelady from Missouri rise?
Madam Chair, I claim the time in opposition to this amendment, and I am opposed.
The gentlelady is recognized.
I rise in opposition to the amendment offered by the gentlelady from Michigan. Not only is this amendment problematic, but as drafted, it's also unenforceable. Nowhere in federal law is the term junk fee defined, not in our securities laws and not in this amendment. I know the Biden administration's financial regulators like to create new terms to advance the president's political agenda, but we shouldn't be making up new terms without defining them here in Congress. The companies impacted by this amendment would be equally in the dark. How can a company know if a given fee is so-called junk when neither the SEC nor the amendment can define it? Should they just charge no fees at all, potentially putting some firms out of business? The only fees Democrats seem to want to spare from this political crusade are those charged by the government itself. For example, the IRS charges fees to folks who pay their taxes late. I get it. No one wants to pay fees, but charging fees for a product or service is a normal part of doing business. I urge my colleagues to oppose, and I reserve.
Gentlelady reserves. The gentlelady from Michigan is recognized.
Yeah, but it's surprise fees. It's hidden fees. Many of the residents outside this chamber would disagree. And I think it's really important to understand the underlining bill amends the security laws, and the security laws are administered by the SEC. But I think it's really incredibly important to understand, of course there's fees and so forth, but hidden fees. We're talking about hidden surprise fees that our residents know nothing about. That's the essence of why we need this amendment. Again, we cannot continue to allow our residents to be, impacted negatively by the fact that they don't want to be transparent. They want to hide these fees. They don't want us to know exactly what they're charging us. So I think it's incredibly important. I yield back the balance of my time.
Time is expired. Gentlelady from Missouri is recognized.
Madam Chair, may I inquire how much time I have remaining?
Gentlelady has 3.5 minutes remaining.
Thank you. I just want to reiterate my opposition to this amendment. As I said, the only fees Democrats seem to want to spare from the political crusade are those charged by the government itself. As I said, the IRS charges fees to folks who pay their taxes late. This is no definition of junk fee anywhere in here. And I'd also like to point out to the gentlelady from Michigan that I was a sponsor of the Fly Together Act, which did away with additional fees for children that are accompanied by their parents on a plane. Those children get to fly free with their parents. That was my piece of legislation. It's called Fly Together. It was in the base legislation of the Federal Aviation Administration reauthorization, and it passed this U.S. House chamber without the gentlelady from Michigan's support. I thank the chair, and I urge my colleagues to oppose this amendment, and I yield back.
The question is on the amendment offered by the gentlewoman from Michigan. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it.
Madam Chair, I request a recorded vote.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentlewoman from Michigan will be postponed. It is now in order to consider Amendment Number 8, printed in Part B of the House Report 118-407. For what purpose does the gentleman from Massachusetts seek recognition?
Good morning, Madam Chair. I believe I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 8, printed in Part B of House Report number 118-407, offered by Mr. Lynch of Massachusetts.
Pursuant to House Resolution 1052, the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Lynch, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Massachusetts.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In the interest of investor protection, my amendment would prevent H.R. 2799 from taking effect unless the Securities and Exchange Commission certifies to Congress that this misguided legislation will not increase the amount of fraud in our financial system. Importantly, this certification would be based on SEC consultation with our state securities regulators. As ranking member of the Subcommittee on Digital Assets, Financial Technology, and Inclusion, I'm strongly supportive of reducing barriers to capital market participation in a manner that maximizes investor protections and regulatory oversight and responsible capital formation. Unfortunately, this bill removes basic protections and promotes reckless deregulation at the expense of all three. Not surprisingly, our state securities regulators are overwhelmingly opposed to this so-called Expanding Access to Capital Act because it would preempt critical state laws that are in place to protect retail investors against fraud and other financial misconduct. In my own state of Massachusetts, our longtime Secretary of the Commonwealth and Chief Securities Regulator Bill Galvin reports that this bill would significantly undermine the state's ability to regulate financial middlemen such as finders and private placement brokers, and that these financial intermediaries regularly promote private investments that are both high risk and non-liquid. By providing these individuals with a virtual safe harbor from registration and other important investor protections requirements, H.R. 2799 will weaken oversight and enforcement in this area. According to Secretary Galvin, finders will be, and I'm quoting, invisible to regulators and market observers until problems arise, close quote. The Massachusetts Securities Division has in fact commenced several recent enforcement actions related to finder misconduct, including the solicitation of fraudulent promissory notes to further a Ponzi scheme and the use of scam investment tactics to raise small business capital for businesses that never materialized. These schemes have cost Massachusetts investors millions of dollars. Similarly, the North American Securities Administrators Association, which is on the front line of investor protections across our country, strongly opposes this legislation on the grounds that it would, quote, make it impossible for state securities regulators to promote responsible capital formation and protect investors in the states. Under existing investor protection statutes and registration requirements, regulators are able to directly engage with small business owners and entrepreneurs to educate them on responsible options for raising capital, to help them avoid compliance mistakes and deter fraud that will harm investors and businesses alike. The bill before us, however, would undermine those efforts by obscuring finders and other middlemen from the lines of sight of state and federal regulating authorities. Moreover, bad actors are increasingly peddling cryptocurrency asset securities. In the wake of the abrupt collapse of FTX and the convictions of its founder, Sam Bankman-Fried, for stealing nearly $10 billion in customer funds, we are well aware of the volatility of the cryptocurrency sector and its susceptibility to financial fraud. We should be strengthening transparency and accountability in the private securities markets rather than facilitating reckless financial behavior. Madam Chair, our capital markets are the envy of the world, specifically because of the robust state and federal regulatory regimes that function to protect investors and promote confidence in capital formation. H.R. 2799 will dismantle this framework. That is precisely why a variety of consumer investor protection advocates also strongly oppose this bill, including the Consumer Federation of America, Americans for Financial Reform, and Public Citizen. They report that an alarming proportion of the individuals who act as financial middlemen already have numerous red flags on their records, presenting an elevated risk of fraud to investors. So I urge my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to support this common-sense investor protection amendment, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Missouri rise?
Madam Chair, I claim the time in opposition, and I am opposed to this amendment.
The gentlewoman from Missouri is recognized.
Madam Chair, I appreciate the gentleman's concern about fraud in our financial system. It is a serious problem that impacts far too many Americans. However, his intent in offering this unnecessary and unworkable amendment seems to be to ensure this bill never takes effect. This amendment would provide state regulators and unelected bureaucrats the veto power over duly passed laws. That should concern everyone in this chamber. So let's dig into this. First, the amendment is unnecessary. The federal securities laws already include broad anti-fraud provisions that are designed to protect investors. The same provisions offer recourse against those who have engaged in security fraud. The federal securities laws also include bad actor disqualifications that prevent fraudsters from benefiting from certain privileges offered under the securities laws. To be clear, nothing in expanding access to Capital Act would modify, remove, or limit the securities laws' anti-fraud or bad actor provisions in any way, period. Second, the amendment is entirely unworkable. For example, the amendment broadly states the SEC must, and I quote, consult with state security regulators. All states? Certain states? If so, who decides which states? Can one state block the law from taking effect? Congress does not need approval from the executive branch agencies and state regulators to do its job. Let's be serious. Fewer companies are entering our public markets than at any time in recent history, and the current SEC is ignoring its statutory mandate to facilitate capital formation. Congress has an obligation to make law to address these glaring issues. I would welcome my Democratic colleagues to join Republicans in our efforts to help small businesses, entrepreneurs, and investors by supporting H.R. 2799. And Madam Chair, I reserve and will also make a point that I do not believe that the House has been in order.
Thank you to the gentlelady from Missouri, and you reserve, but I understand, and I was going to point that out when it was, and we would ask the members or the guests in the gallery to please make sure that you are quiet and not disturbing the proceedings. But he's still going. The visitors in the gallery, he's just not. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Massachusetts.
Madam Chair, may I inquire how much time I have remaining?
Gentleman has 30 seconds remaining.
Great. Then very briefly, I would just add that in this bill there are several preemption provisions that prevent state regulators from actually doing their jobs, and that's problematic. And they are, in many cases, elected officials. They are not unelected officials. Their responsibility is to protect investors, and they've done a good job, all 50 states. So, again, for all the reasons I previously stated, I ask members on both sides of the aisle to please support this common sense amendment. Thank you, and I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. The gentlewoman from Missouri is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. May I inquire how much time I have remaining?
Gentlelady has 2.5 minutes remaining.
I thank the chair, and I would mention to my good friend, my colleague, Mr. Lynch, that the preemption clauses were struck in the manager's amendment, and I do certainly appreciate the gentleman's concern about fraud in our financial system. However, his intent in offering this very unnecessary and unworkable amendment seems to be to ensure that this bill never takes effect. With that, Madam Chair, I would urge my colleagues to oppose this amendment, and I yield back.
Gentlelady yields. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Massachusetts. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to.
Madam Chair, I request a roll call vote on that. Thank you.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Massachusetts will be postponed. It is now in order to consider Amendment Number 9, printed in Part B of the House Report 118-407. For what purposes does the gentlewoman from California seek recognition?
Madam Chair, I have an amendment at the desk made in order by the rule.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 9, printed in Part B of House Report number 118-407. offered by Ms. Waters of California.
Pursuant to House Resolution 1052, the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Waters, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from California.
I yield myself such time as I may consume. Madam Chair, my amendment will provide needed transparency into the opaque world of private equity and venture capital funds, particularly around their investments in minority-owned, women-owned, veteran-owned, and rural businesses. Today, these private funds play a big role in capital allocation from mergers and acquisitions and non-bank lending to restructurings and bankruptcies. As of 2021, private funds held more than $7 trillion in investments. Venture capital funds managed nearly 1.3 trillion, providing funding to startups and early-stage companies across the country. These are staggering numbers, but the amount going into minority-owned and women-owned businesses is not. For example, the White House earlier this month noted that Black-founded companies receive less than 1% of venture capital funding annually, while women-founded businesses receive just about 2%. When I was chairwoman of the Financial Services Committee, the first thing I did was to create a subcommittee on diversity and inclusion. Our committee convened dozens of hearings on diversity and inclusion, receiving hundreds of hours of testimony that highlighted one overwhelming conclusion was clear businesses' case for supporting and investing in diversity. Study after study has found that diverse companies consistently outperform non-diverse companies, despite being disproportionately undercapitalized. This is good for industry, good for business, and good for investors. And yet, limited access to financing is restricting the ability of women and business owners of color to fulfill their potential, generate jobs, and contribute to their communities. Because private funds do not have the same transparency requirements as other large investors, it is difficult to gauge the number, size, and scope of their commitments to women-owned, diverse-owned, and veteran-owned and rural businesses. Moreover, following the murder of George Floyd in 2020, a number of private firms pledged to make advancements on racial and gender equity as part of their business strategy. But without accurate and timely information, investors and the public can't hold these fund managers accountable. That's why my amendment is so important. If private funds want to take advantage of the ability to peddle their investments to the public, which is what this bill would permit, then at the very least, they need to show how they're investing in all of America. So I ask members to support my amendment. Thank you, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentlelady reserves. For what purpose does the gentlelady from Missouri seek?
Madam Chair, I claim the time in opposition, and I am opposed to this amendment.
The gentlelady is recognized.
I rise in opposition to the amendment offered by the ranking member. This amendment is problematic on several fronts. First, it is an attempt to impose more onerous disclosure requirements on actors in the private markets than what exists in the public markets. Doing so would be unprecedented, even for an overzealous regulator. For decades, our security laws have intentionally featured vastly different disclosure requirements between our public markets and our private markets. This amendment would destroy that intentional distinction by mandating an unworkable disclosure regime on private funds that is more onerous than what is required of any public company. The public disclosure of the type of information required by this amendment could be weaponized by activists to name and shame market participants for pursuing an investment strategy that may not be politically favorable to the progressive left. This would be counterproductive and against the spirit of the securities laws, which are not intended to encourage investments in any one sector or type of business. The increased compliance costs resulting from this amendment would disproportionately hurt smaller, emerging funds, advisors, and investment companies, many of which are minority-owned, women-owned, and veteran-owned and rural. If Democrats are serious about wanting to help underserved communities thrive, they will oppose this amendment. Instead, they should support the underlying bill, which will help Americans from all walks of life realize their version of the American dream. And Madam Chair, I reserve.
Gentlelady reserves. The gentlelady from California is recognized.
I'm prepared to close if the gentlewoman from Missouri doesn't have any further speakers.
I have the last word, so closed.
Thank you very
Gentlelady
much.
from California is recognized.
I yield myself the balance of the time. My common sense amendment would require private funds to disclose their investments into women-owned, minority-owned, veteran-owned, and rural businesses. So far, too long, these well-performing, well-deserving businesses have been undercapitalized and underinvested in by wealthy firms that made empty promises when it was trendy to do so. We know that what gets measured and reported gets done. This amendment will provide the kind of transparency that investors, particularly public pension plans, want to ensure they're investing in the most profitable parts of the economy. So I strongly urge members to vote yes on my amendment. Thank you, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlelady yields. Gentlelady from Missouri is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If Democrats are serious about wanting to help underserved communities thrive, they will oppose this amendment, and instead, they should support the underlying bill, which will help Americans from all walks of life realize their version of the American dream. Madam Chair, I would urge my colleagues to oppose this amendment, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlelady yields. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentlewoman from California. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to. Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentlewoman from California will be postponed. Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, proceedings will now resume on those amendments printed in Part B of House Report 118-407 on the further proceedings on which further proceedings were postponed in the following order. Do we just do the first one, or do you want Amendment number 6 by Ms. Houlihan of Pennsylvania. Amendment number 7 of Ms. Tlaib of Michigan. Amendment number 8 by Mr. Lynch of Massachusetts. Amendment number 9 by Ms. Waters of California. The chair will reduce to 2 minutes the minimum time for any electronic vote after the first vote in the series. The unfinished business is the request for a recorded vote on Amendment number 6, printed in Part B of House Report 118-407 by the gentlewoman from Pennsylvania, Ms. Houlihan, on which further proceedings were postponed and on which the noes prevailed by voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment number 6, printed in Part B of House Report number 118-407, offered by Ms. Houlihan of Pennsylvania.
A recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of the request for a recorded vote will rise and be counted. A sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their vote by electronic device. This will be a 15-minute vote.
Have all members voted? Does anyone wish to change their vote? On this vote, the ayes are 200, the nays are 203. The amendment is not agreed to. The unfinished business is a request for recorded vote on amendment number 7, printed in Part B of House Report 118-407 by the gentlewoman from Michigan, Mrs. Tlaib, on which further proceedings were postponed, on which the noes prevailed by voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment number 7, printed in Part B of House Report number 118-407, offered by Ms. Tlaib of Michigan.
A recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of the recorded vote will rise and be counted. A sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is offered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 2-minute vote. Members, you have 1 minute. On this vote, the yeas are 204, the nays are 212. The amendment is not agreed to. The unfinished business is the request for recorded vote on amendment number 8, printed in Part B of House Report 118-407 by the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Lynch, on which further proceedings were postponed, on which the noes prevailed by voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment number 8, printed in Part B of House Report number 118-407, offered by Mr. Lynch of Massachusetts.
A recorded vote has been requested. Those that support the request for recorded vote will rise and be counted. A sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 2-minute vote. Members, you now have 30 seconds. Have all members voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? On this vote, the yeas are 208, the nays are 211. The amendment is not agreed to. The unfinished business is the request for a recorded vote on amendment number 9, printed in Part B of House Report 118-407 by the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Waters, on which further proceedings were postponed and on which the noes prevailed by voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment number 9, printed in Part B of House Report number 118-407, offered by Ms. Waters of California.
Oh, yeah. Did she read it? Sure. A recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of the request for a recorded vote will rise and be counted. A sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 2-minute vote. Members, 1 minute left. Does any member wish to change their vote? On this vote, the yeas are 206, the nays are 217. The amendment is not agreed to. There being no further amendment under the rule, the committee rises. Our 2799, and pursuant to House Resolution 1052, I report the bill is amended by the resolution back to the House with sundry further amendments adopted in the Committee of the Whole. Thanks.
Wonderful.
Yep. You ready? The chair of the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union reports that the committee has had under consideration the bill H.R. 2799 and, pursuant to House Resolution 1052, reports the bill as amended by that resolution back to the House with sundry further amendments adopted in the Committee of the Whole. Under the rule, the previous question is ordered in a separate vote. Is a separate vote demanded on any further amendment reported from the Committee of the Whole? If not, the chair will put them in gross. The question is on the adoption of the amendments. Those in favor, please say aye. Those opposed, please say no. The ayes have it. The amendments are adopted. The question is on the engrossment and third reading of the bill. Those in favor, please say aye. Those opposed, please say no. The ayes have it. Third reading.
A bill to make reforms to the capital markets of the United States and for other purposes.
Good luck with that. I do have a... The House will be in order. The House will be in order. For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania the gentlewoman from Pennsylvania seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I have a motion to recommit at the desk.
The clerk shall report the motion.
Ms. Houlihan of Pennsylvania moves to recommit the bill, H.R. 2799, to the Committee on Financial Services.
Pursuant to Clause 2B of Rule 19, the previous question is ordered on the motion to recommit. The question is on the motion to recommit. Those in favor, please say aye. Those opposed, please say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. Noes have it.
Mr. Speaker, I ask for the yeas and nays.
Does the gentlelady wish the yeas and nays? The yeas and nays have requested. Those favoring the vote by the yeas and nays will rise. A sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. Pursuant to Clause 9 of Rule 20, this 5-minute vote on the motion to recommit will be followed by a 5-minute vote on passage of the bill if ordered. Members, this is a 5-minute vote. On this vote, the yeas are 205, the nays are 213. The motion is not adopted. The question is on passage of the bill. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, please say no. The ayes have it. The bill is passed, and without objection, a motion to reconsider is laid on the table.
We did it right here.
Recorded vote is requested.
Request a recorded vote?
Yes.
A recorded vote is requested. Those in favor of a recorded vote will rise. A sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This is a 5-minute vote. On this vote, the yeas are 212, the nays are 205. The bill is passed without objection. A motion to reconsider is laid on the table. For what purpose does the gentleman from Arizona seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that when the House adjourns today, it adjourn to meet at noon on Monday next morning, our debate, and 2 p.m. for legislative business.
Without objection, so ordered. Okay.
The chair will now entertain requests for 1-minute speeches. For what purpose does the gentleman from Nebraska seek recognition? Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute. Please take all conversations off the floor. The gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to offer my condolences and thoughts to Nebraskans impacted by recent severe fires and recognize the extraordinary response of emergency personnel across the 3rd District of Nebraska. Last week, central Nebraska wildfires claimed over 70,000 acres in 24 hours in the counties of Lincoln, Custer, Dawson, and Logan. While the wind-swept flames forced evacuations and destroyed livestock, structures, supplies, pasture, and miles of fence, thanks to the courageous efforts of responders to ensure the safety of Nebraskans, no lives were lost. From across the state, emergency personnel, pilots, and more than 50 local and volunteer fire departments came together to contain the blaze. Countless private citizens pitched in to move livestock, disc fields, and transport water. In fact, the Red Willow Rural Fire Department testified to the vital help of the community members, saying, "We couldn't do what we do without area farmers and ranchers." My deep gratitude goes out to 3rd District volunteers and businesses who came together to assist in recovery. From local businesses donating livestock feed and fencing repair supplies to GoFundMe recovery efforts, the remarkable generosity in the face of disaster shows what Nebraskans are made of. Quick to lend a hand, with greater concern for their neighbor than for the cost to themselves. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield back.
Please take all conversations off the floor. For what purpose does the gentleman from New Jersey seek recognition?
Ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute, revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to discuss the strong State of the Union thanks to President Biden. And I had the distinct honor of speaking with the President right before and right after his historic State of the Union address last night. President Biden's leadership has created the strongest economy in the world, with almost 15 million new jobs created in this country. He has saved Americans billions of dollars with lower costs of medication, health care insurance, and the removal of junk fees. His actions will cut climate pollution in half by 2030. His focus on infrastructure has created 40,000 projects in 45 American communities. He signed the first major bipartisan gun safety bill in 30 years to protect Americans from gun violence, and he has expanded benefits for military veterans. The list of successes goes on and on. The State of the Union is strong, and under President Biden's leadership, it continues to get
Gentleman's
stronger.
time has
And
expired.
with that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
The gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from New York seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I seek unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, in his State of the Union address last night, President Biden chose to give a divisive campaign speech instead of bringing Americans together with a hopeful vision for the future. He completely failed to take ownership of his disastrous border policies and weak leadership and instead tried to pass the blame on House Republicans. President Biden tried to pass the blame for the border crisis he created by executive order, pushed for legislation that would codify his bad policies, and failed to mention that House Republicans passed H.R. 2, the strongest border bill in history, that has been sitting in the Senate on Chuck Schumer's desk since last May. Last night, President Biden claimed that we have the best economy in the world. The American people aren't buying that lie. They have to pay for Biden's inflationary policies every single day, from groceries to gas to energy bills and housing. The American dream is unaffordable under President Joe Biden. He single-handedly created the crisis at our borders. He crushed our economy, crippled the American energy sector, plunged us deeper into debt, and enabled violent crime in our major cities and made it harder to raise a family or own a business in the United States. Americans deserve a better leader than Joe Biden. And I yield back, Mr. Speaker.
Expired. Members are reminded to refrain from engaging in personalities toward the President. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from North Carolina seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I seek unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today in strong opposition to the Alabama Supreme Court's decision declaring that frozen embryos created through IVF are people, upsetting family planning and medical science. This ruling is just the latest in a long line of assaults on the rights of women since Roe v. Wade was overturned. Within days of the decision, women struggling to get pregnant were faced with the devastating reality that their appointments had been canceled and that their hopes of starting a family were put on pause. Mr. Speaker, we cannot accept this latest attempt to control women and our bodies. 184 House Republicans have co-sponsored bills that would classify embryos as children under federal law, despite their empty and meaningless promises to support IVF. Now is the time for action. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back.
The gentlewoman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Washington seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I request unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today as chair of the Congressional Western Caucus to recognize the 50th anniversary of the Western Energy Alliance, an important ally who understands the critical choices that Congress faces on the future of American energy policy. For the past 50 years, the Alliance has helped inform members of Congress in a bipartisan fashion about federal policies impacting energy production, conservation, and public lands management. Since 1974, they've been a strong advocate for balancing American production and protecting the environment. The small and mid-sized businesses that make up the Alliance understand that our nation is at an inflection point. We can either follow the policies that make American energy secure and are beacon to the rest of the world, or we can follow the path through the briar patch of the President's whole-of-government approach and tie the hands of American energy producers. I strongly support America's energy strength, and because of that, support the work done by the Western Energy Alliance. Thank you, and I yield back.
The gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Hawaii seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to rise and address the House for a minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Aloha, Mr. Speaker. Aloha e kaluna ho'omalu. I ke la me ke ia pepe luali e ho'omai kai a e pai pai aku ko Hawaii pai aina ika mahina o lalo Hawaii. Oka o lalo Hawaii a ole ia, he olelo valeno, oiano, he pilina ina mo olelo, me ka moho meheu ke kahi. He kuliana ka ko, e malama, a I kia ina, mo o meheu, mena olelo, ka po e o iwi a pau. E ola ka olelo Hawaii. Ho ai yaku no, ya oi, e ka luna ho o malu. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The gentlewoman will provide a translation of her remarks. Thank you. For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I request unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to address the House. Being a member of Congress is no walk in the park, but we often forget to recognize the commitment and sacrifices the spouses make to allow us to do our job. As the year gets only busier and busier with children, summer breaks, sporting events, and their own careers, I want to profoundly thank each and every husband and wife of a member of Congress. They absolutely tackle it all. To all the congressional spouses, especially my lovely bride, Leslie, we appreciate you, your vision for our family, your grace on all the hard days, your courage to push past the noise of this place, and your constant support. We absolutely could not do that without you. Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
What purpose does the gentleman from New York seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, request unanimous consent to address the House floor for 1 minute and revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to honor 9-year-old Bethany Moultrie, a constituent in my district, for her amazing work in providing care packages for the homeless across the Hudson Valley. Through her nonprofit organization, Bethany's Happy Bags, Bethany and her mother have delivered food, first aid kits, toiletries, and smiles to people in need across our community. Along with her mother, Colleen Moultrie, Bethany began Bethany's Happy Bags in December of 2020, when it was her birthday wish to help people in need in her community. As word began to spread over Facebook, the Moultries began proactively receiving supplies and fundings from all across our community and over time from all across our country. It's now developed a movement across the nation, inspiring other young people to do the same. This project has formed into a much larger act of service, and community members have joined together to donate to the Moultries' cause. These efforts have led to over 5,000 Happy Bags distributed to the people who need them the most in our community. Just a few months ago, I had the privilege to meet Bethany and her family, to recognize her, to commend her, and also to thank her for her help making Valentines for veterans in our community. She does a lot across our community. I want every single person across the country to recognize Bethany and know that our whole community shares that pride in her. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Montana seek recognition?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I request unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today I rise to celebrate this week as Invest in Veterans Week, as proclaimed by Montana Governor Gianforte. Currently, nearly 9% of the Treasure State's population is made up of veterans. There are over 78,000 veterans in Montana, the 5th highest population of veterans per capita of any state. It's truly an honor and a privilege to represent a state so deeply rooted in military history. Businesses owned by veterans employ over 5 million people and generate over $1 trillion in revenue annually. Whether that be through starting their own farm, ranch, or small business, many of our nation's heroes come home to their families and communities ready and eager to find ways they can continue to benefit and serve our communities. By investing in our veterans, we're able to provide them with the resources that they need to continue to use their exceptional talents and skills that benefit all of us. Investing in our veterans should not be limited to just this week, but it should be our mission all year round. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from California seek recognition?
For 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I rise today, March 8, 2024, to celebrate International Women's Day. 30 years ago, in 1994, at the suggestion of my friend Beata Pozniak, who is with us here today, I introduced H.J. Res. 316 in the House of Representatives to have Congress designate March 8 as the International Women's Day. In this year, 2024, International Women's Day has special importance. Today, as women's rights are under attack, we rededicate ourselves to fight for gender equality, reproductive rights, pay equity, maternal health, and preventing violence against women. The United Nations has selected the theme, Inspire Inclusion, for International Women's Day in 2024. Here in the House of Representatives, let us inspire women's inclusion and honor women in the United States and around the world. Thank you, Beata.
The gentlelady's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentlelady from Iowa seek recognition? With that objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to celebrate the Community Foundation of Greater Muscatine's 25th anniversary. For a quarter of a century, the Community Foundation has been a beacon of hope, supporting countless initiatives that enhance the quality of life for Muscatine residents. Since 1999, the foundation has granted over $47 million to support vital charitable programs and projects. Families, children, veterans, the homeless, food, you name it, they do it all. As we recognize their 25th anniversary, we must also recognize the countless individuals and organizations who have been part of their journey. Congratulations to the Community Foundation for 25 years of transforming lives and creating opportunities in Muscatine. And go Hawks! With that, I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Florida seek recognition?
Consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
With that objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to commend the African American Chamber of Commerce of Central Florida for their unwavering commitment to uplifting and celebrating the contributions of Black-owned businesses in the Central Florida community for over 75 years. This weekend, the Chamber will host its 20th annual Eagle Awards, a culmination of 2 decades of the Chamber's efforts to spotlight Central Florida's most dynamic businesses and entrepreneurs. This award ceremony is a celebration of resilience, innovation, and community building, reflecting on the impact these businesses have on driving the growth and development of our diverse business landscape. Over the last decade, Black-owned businesses have grown exponentially in Central Florida, yet access to capital remains a limiting factor to the success. I encourage my colleagues to join me in supporting our local Chamber of Commerce that champion minority-owned businesses and bring forth legislation to address the specific challenges faced by Black and minority-owned entrepreneurs to create a future where every entrepreneur has the opportunity to thrive. Thank you. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Tennessee seek recognition?
I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
With that objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I, like many Americans, thought when the governors of Texas and Florida began transporting illegal immigrants to blue cities or sanctuary cities across the country that change would follow. It did not. Last October, New York City Mayor Eric Adams, a Democrat, went to Mexico to send a message that there was, quote, no more room in New York. Even our nation's largest city cannot sustain more than 100,000 illegal immigrants in less than 2 years. Yet the president has continued his open border policies and his unprecedented catch and release operation. He and his administration also continue peddling the falsehood that our borders are secure. Now, Mayor Adams is reported to have made arrangements to bus immigrants back to the border. There's a reason for this. It's not racist or anti-immigrant. It's because the president's policy is unsustainable. I stand with the many Tennesseans I represent who embrace legal immigration, but who want to see our border brought under control. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back.
Members are reminded to refrain from engaging in personalities towards the President. For what purpose does the gentleman from Nevada seek recognition?
I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to honor Hadia Broadbent, a Las Vegas native who turned her life's biggest challenge into a powerful message of hope. Born with HIV, Hadia wasn't expected to live past her early childhood, but she defied those odds, living until 39 before passing away last week. And she dedicated her life to educating others about HIV and AIDS. She appeared on national platforms telling everyone that life with HIV is still a life full of potential. At age 12, she said, and I quote, "I am the future, and I have AIDS. I can do anything I put my mind to." And so she did, making every day count and inspiring us all to do the same. Hadia's legacy is a testament to the power of resilience, hope, and the impact one person can have. As we remember her today, let's carry her message of positivity and determination forward. Thank you. May God bless Hadia Broadbent. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Georgia seek recognition?
Ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to recognize the city of Bloomingdale, Georgia, which is soon to celebrate the 50th anniversary of its incorporation into Chatham County. Bloomingdale was founded in the 1830s as an agricultural community situated along the Central Georgia Railway line with an economy dependent on the farming and rail sectors. In 1974, the rural, close-knit community was incorporated into Chatham County. Now Bloomingdale is home to nearly 2,800 residents. As the city has grown, its history has been preserved through sites such as Veterans Freedom Park and the city's History Museum. Locals take pride in the city's festivals and attractions, such as the annual Easter egg hunt and fireworks celebration on July the 4th. The city's geographical attributes provide ample opportunities to engage popular outdoor activities, including fishing and canoeing. Overall, Bloomingdale offers something for everyone, making it an excellent location to call home. I'm proud to represent the city's residents as well as those in the surrounding communities. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from North Carolina seek recognition?
Consent to address the House for 1 minute and revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When you get elected to Congress, you have a choice to make. You can work hard on legislation, you can work hard to build relationships across the aisle and get things done, or you can go join the circus. And too many of my colleagues choose the latter, to join the circus, to engage in performative politics. And Mr. Speaker, last night the clown show was on full display by the House Republican Conference, continually interrupting, disrupting the president. Mr. Speaker, in my time here, I have voted for Speaker 19 times. I have voted for 4 continuing resolutions. I see a House Republican Conference totally incapable of governing and totally incapable of keeping the clowns in check. The yelling, the screaming at the president was shameful. It was a disgrace. In 2009, Joe Wilson yelled at President Obama and said, "You lie," and the cat came out of the bag. And what happened last night was absolutely unacceptable. We need to do so much better. We deserve so much better for the United States of America.
The gentleman's time has
We need to restore
expired.
civility, decency, and respect to the United States Congress. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from South Carolina, Joe Wilson, seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute, revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, the insulting campaign speech last night of Biden was correctly identified today as vitriolic by Gary David and Christopher Thompson of WVOC Radio in Columbia. President Trump is correct. The Biden false accusations are a Trump arrangement dividing the American people. And also Senator Katie Britt is correct. Quote, "Families are hurting. At our southern border, we see it. President Biden inherited the most secure border of all times, but minutes after taking office, he suspended deportations, halted the border wall, and announced a plan to give amnesty. We know that President Biden's border crisis was invited with 94 executive decisions in his first 100 days. Every family is at risk of attack, as we see with the murder of Laken Riley. In conclusion, God bless our troops who successfully protected America for 20 years in the global war on terrorism as it continues moving from the Afghanistan safe haven to America. We don't need new laws. We need to enforce existing laws. Biden shamefully opens borders for dictators as more 9/11 attacks across America are imminent, as warned by the FBI. I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Oregon seek recognition?
To address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to highlight my recently introduced bipartisan legislation, the Rural Partnership and Prosperity Act. According to the Oregon Center for Public Policy, rural Oregonians face higher levels of unemployment and poverty. In fact, the poverty rate in rural Oregon sits at 15.6%. 4 points higher than in urban areas. Yet local governments, nonprofits, and rural development organizations don't have the staff and resources needed to tackle these problems in our communities. Rural America is getting the short end of the stick right now, and it is time we change that. My bill would create a new federal grant program to help rural communities address urgent needs like childcare, housing, job training, and more. It expands access to existing opportunities by helping local leaders navigate the complex system of federal grants. And it improves coordination between federal agencies to make sure we're approaching rural development in the most efficient and effective way possible. The Rural Partnership and Prosperity Act is a common sense bipartisan solution that will help us bridge the urban-rural divide in this country. We have to level the playing field for rural America and ensure these communities can thrive for generations to come. My legislation would bring us closer to that goal, and I urge my colleagues to join me in supporting. I yield back.
Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 9th, 2023, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Green, is recognized for 60 minutes as the designee of the Minority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, and still I rise. And I rise as a liberated Democrat, unbought, unbossed, and unafraid. I rise in the spirit of Shirley Chisholm, who coined the notion of being unbought, unbossed, and unafraid. I rise as a proud scion of the enslaved Africans whose lives were sacrificed for more than 240 years to make America great. Their lives were sacrificed because America at that time desired to have a caste system, a system wherein persons were born into this caste, would live, die, and be buried as a part of the caste, not a class. Caste is hereditary. A class is a socioeconomic circumstance. So there was this desire to have persons be a part of the caste, and persons of African ancestry were selected because they were identifiable. And they wanted an identifiable caste. They wanted this caste to be subservient, immediately agreeing to whatever the master said, and they wanted them to be powerless. And they were exactly that, a powerless, subservient, identifiable caste for more than 240 years. Mr. Speaker, I still love my country notwithstanding its history. I love it because I believe in the ideals that have been expressed in the Declaration of Independence, in the Constitution, in the Pledge of Allegiance. So those ideals give me hope. And I believe that America still has much to achieve, but I believe that America can still dream big, and accomplish great things. And it's my hope that we will at some point achieve the ideals extolled in the Pledge of Allegiance, liberty and justice for all, the ideal of government by the people, for the people, the notion that we can have a country wherein all persons are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. These are the things that I believe we can achieve. I believe that we ought to honor the persons who are enslaved. I honor victims of great horrific tragedies. I honor the victims of the Holocaust. There is nothing to be compared to the Holocaust. There is nothing to be compared to the enslavement of millions of people for 240 years. These are two horrific incidents in history, two circumstances. I believe that we ought to respect and acknowledge that the Holocaust occurred and that it has had an impact not only on the people of that time, but on the people of this time. I also believe we ought to acknowledge that enslavement occurred. There are people who don't want to acknowledge slavery in this country. They want to say that it was involuntary relocation. This is a fact. Well, it wasn't. It was murder, it was rape, it was robbery, it was kidnapping. It was all of these horrific things, including lynching. It was an horrific, horrible circumstance that was imposed upon people. So I think we should honor both the Holocaust and what we call slavery, the enslavement of persons of African ancestry. Because these persons of African ancestry built the capital, we know of the great things that they did, built the roads, the bridges, planted the crops, harvested the crops, fed the nation. They were the economic foundational mothers and fathers of the country. Why wouldn't we honor them, given the role that they played in making America great? But for some reason, we can't find it in our hearts, it seems, to honor them. But we can find it within our hearts, as I have found it within my heart, to honor the victims of the Holocaust. Some people would ask why. Here's the reason why. Glad you asked. Because it's easy to look through the window of life into someone else's horrific circumstances and condemn what happened. It's very difficult to look into the mirror of life, into our own circumstances, and acknowledge what happened. It's difficult for people who have suffered to do it. You would think that people who have suffered would be among the first to say, we need to have a Slavery Remembrance Day. Ought to be among the first to say, well, to give a Congressional Gold Medal to the enslaved persons, just as we have given a Congressional Gold Medal to the enslavers. In 1956, this Congress of the United States of America accorded a Congressional Gold Medal to Confederate soldiers. Won't do such a thing. This Congress will not honor the victims of slavery the same as we have honored Confederate soldiers who were the enslavers. It's difficult to look into the mirror of life, but that's why I'm here. I'm here to help you see what you choose not to see and to do what you choose not to do. You may not do it today, but it will happen. It's just a matter of time. There will be more like me to require you to see what you choose not to see. It's just a matter of time. So I am a proud scion. That means that I'm a descendant of these people who had the injustice of enslavement perpetrated upon them and perpetuated for some 240 years. I'm a descendant. But I like saying that I'm a scion because it has a more of a regal connotation. It says you're proud to be associated with your ancestors. It says you recognize what your ancestors have accomplished. It recognizes the greatness of your ancestors. Yes, I am a scion, but I'm also the progenitor of August the 20th as Slavery Remembrance Day. August 20th, the date that the White Lion docked at a place that we now call Norfolk, Virginia, near there in Point Comfort. And it had 20 persons of African ancestry on board who were traded to the colonies. And this was the genesis of slavery in the colonies. There had been slavery before that, but this was the genesis of slavery in the colonies, which became a part of America. So I am the progenitor of making Slavery Remembrance Day a day that is commemorated to the same extent that we commemorate the Holocaust. Two separate incidents, two separate circumstances, two separate horrific occurrences in history. One, we commemorate, and I do so proudly. The other, we would like to forget. We would like to just set aside, not give those enslaved persons the just treatment that we would accord others. So I want to see Slavery Remembrance Day commemorated across the length and breadth of this country. A day set aside to commemorate the more than 10 million lives that were forced into slavery, had it perpetrated upon them and perpetuated it for some 240 plus years. We ought to commemorate their lives. Therefore, I contend we have and must have Slavery Remembrance Day. Now, President Biden has agreed with me and Senator Elizabeth Warren. The two of us have been working together. We had Slavery Remembrance Day to pass the House of Representatives. Hasn't passed the Senate, but it passed in the House of Representatives. And I will always say thanks to Mr. Steny Hoyer, who at that time was in a position to make a difference, and he did. Many people are in a position to make a difference, and they don't. Mr. Hoyer made a difference. I imagine he's been criticized for it, but Mr. Hoyer, wherever you are, I assure you that posterity will see the kindness and the understanding that had to envelop you for you to do this. And I commend you for what you did, and I know that history is going to be kind to you. But the president acknowledged Slavery Remembrance Day with a communique, a press statement, if you will. And I'm proud to know that he would do so. This president is a president that I have great respect for, and I commend him for many things that he has done. Today, I want to commend him for his comments about the Palestinians and the suffering that is taking place in Palestine, Gaza, if you will, but in Palestine to this very second as I'm speaking now. I commend the president for having the courage. It takes courage to do what he did. It takes courage in an environment where Palestinians are not appreciated, not celebrated. In this House, we have passed resolutions, several of them, that have done things that I think should have been done related to what happened on October 7th, what happened to persons who were living in Israel. I commend and I appreciate the passage of those resolutions. I voted for resolutions to deal with the circumstances that occurred on October 7th when the dastardly deeds were perpetrated by Hamas. Hamas is a terrorist organization. Hamas did things that we really don't care to talk about or discuss, but we have to acknowledge that there was murder, that there was rape, that there were decapitations that took place. We have to acknowledge the truth. It happened. Hamas. So I have no kind things to say about Hamas. I have things to say about Israel, the Palestinians, and the president. So, Mr. President, I thank you for what you said. You said you wanted to help with the humanitarian crisis. You said that there would be a pier constructed such that food could be brought in to the Palestinians. I commend you for this, Mr. President. I think we should do this. I have, Mr. President and Mr. Speaker, introduced a resolution affirming the state of Palestine's right to exist. I did this, filed this resolution, because a resolution was filed, HRES 888, reaffirming the state of Israel's right to exist. Israel has a right to exist. This is where I stand. I also stand on the solid, firm conviction that the state of Palestine has a right to exist. Yes, I said state. I know it's not a state currently by our traditional definition, but I believe that it has a right to exist as a state. And I have introduced a resolution affirming the state of Palestine's right to exist. I did it because I believe there ought to be some balance in the House of Representatives. I believe that there ought to be some people with the courage to say, I support the Palestinians, with the courage to say, killing babies, knowingly killing babies, knowingly killing hundreds, thousands of babies is an injustice. You got to have the courage to say, committing an injustice in the name of justice is still an injustice. Sometimes you have to stand alone. But I have been taught and believe that on some questions, it is better to stand alone than not stand at all. Hence, we have HRES 902 affirming the state of Palestine's right to exist. But Mr. President, I believe a picture is worth 1,000 words. And I want people to just see what we have as evidence of the suffering that's taking place in Palestine. This is a picture. Actual representation of people in Palestine. You have 2 adults and 2 children. You see the babies. If you only see Palestinian babies, I would beg that you would open your eyes a little wider. Clear your vision. Assume that these babies are babies from your hometown. Assume that these babies are babies from your neighborhood. So assume that these are Israelis. How would you feel if you saw this circumstance existing for Israelis? These circumstances are circumstances that are horrific. Babies and innocent people ought not be killed in the numbers that are being killed. It is an injustice. And you cannot, in the name of justice, create an injustice. It still becomes and is an injustice. Another example of take that one down if you would. Another example of the horrific circumstances that exist. The devastation, destruction. I just don't know that you can see enough of it to completely comprehend what's destroyed. There are many estimates as to how much of Gaza has been destroyed. The pictures speak louder than the numbers. I've called the numbers to our attention before. Here's a baby. This baby is a victim of the war in Gaza. This baby cannot be blamed for anything that Hamas has done. You can't allege that this baby is somehow associated with Hamas. Killing innocent babies is unacceptable. I refuse to allow people to convince me that you can kill babies and somehow conclude that it's okay because the babies were in the way. I refuse to accept it. Those who do, I would hope that you would understand that there are some of us who can't. Another picture, a depiction of Palestinians having to move out of harm's way, having to do so with what appears to be their belongings, children, donkey, horse-drawn, donkey-drawn, if you will, cart of some sort. No car, having to move from one end to another. No, those living conditions are horrible. We have to do something about it. And I'll tell you why in just a moment. Another picture. Final picture of a baby. Another child. This child hopefully will grow up, hopefully will get the necessary help in terms of physical aid as well as mental aid. This child is going to need help. And I would hope that this child will get help. I would hope that this child doesn't become the next generation of persons who will find themselves at odds with the state of Israel. My hope is that there can be peace and two countries living together. That is my hope. That is my prayer. So to this end, I have written a letter to the President, a letter that I will share with you now that I sent to the President some time ago on February the 29th, a letter to the President of the United States. The reference in the letter is justice and mercy for Palestinians. Justice and mercy for Palestinians. This letter is a letter that I put my thoughts into. I say this because I write my speeches, I write my letters of this magnitude, and I don't want people blaming my staff for the things that I do. My staff, they're great people and they assist, but these are my ideas and my thoughts. This is the letter. Justice and mercy for Palestinians. Dear President Biden, I pen this communique driven by the dictates of conscience and with a heavy heart, saddened by the deaths in Palestine and Israel, compounded by Prime Minister Netanyahu's recent indications that Israel will continue to oppose the unilateral recognition of a Palestinian state and continue maintaining control over stateless Palestinians in lands intended for a Palestinian state. He further indicated that the recognition of a Palestinian state will be reached only through direct negotiations between the parties. So, Mr. Netanyahu, Prime Minister, I rarely say Netanyahu. I respect the position that he holds. He's the Prime Minister, a person with great authority. And his position seems to be that there has to be a negotiated recognition of a Palestinian state, that Israel and Palestinians will have to negotiate. And once they come to a conclusion that there should be a Palestinian state, then we can recognize it. Then he goes on to say that the parties have to negotiate this and it cannot be done unilaterally. Well, here's what I say to the President. Mr. President, on May 14th of 1948, President Harry Truman became the first world leader to recognize Israel as a state within Palestine. Some things bear repeating, phraseology that I use quite regularly, because many things bear repeating. Mr. President, on May 14, 1948, President Harry Truman became the first world leader to recognize Israel as a state within Palestine, effectuating an imbalance of political influence for Israel. Again, some things bear repeating. Effectuating an imbalance of political influence for Israel. This was done unilaterally. That's what's in my letter. This was done unilaterally without the consent of defiantly disapproving Palestinians. The Palestinians did not approve of Israel becoming a state. It was done over their disapproval, many of whom were forcefully relocated. I go on to say, Mr. President, just as the Palestinians of 1948 were not allowed to thwart Israeli statehood, in the name of justice, we should not allow Israel to thwart Palestinian statehood. Sometimes silence can help us to collect our thoughts. Just as Palestinians of 1948 were not allowed to thwart Israeli statehood, in the name of justice, Mr. President, we should not allow Israel to thwart Palestinian statehood. Now we get to some very substantive commentary. This is particularly salient given that Prime Minister Netanyahu obliquely opposed a two-state solution long before October 7, 2023, long before the killing of innocent Israeli men, women, and especially children. Not in the letter, but as an aside, which was a horrific event, a day that will live in infamy, along with other days that live in infamy. I go on to say, for years, Prime Minister Netanyahu has condoned Hamas's control of Gaza to maintain a foil for a lack of a negotiating partner. By the way, this is not news. It's been reported on major networks that this occurred. For many years, Prime Minister Netanyahu has condoned Hamas's control of Gaza to maintain a foil for a lack of a negotiating partner who recognized Israel's right to exist. Mr. Netanyahu, Prime Minister Netanyahu, a person that I respect in the sense that he is the leader of a nation. Prime Minister Netanyahu benefited from having Hamas in control of Gaza because he didn't have to negotiate a two-state solution. It was a means by which he could say the words two-state solution, but he didn't mean it. He didn't. The evidence is there for those who would see, but now there there is a notion that there are some who are so blind, not because they cannot see, but because they choose not to see. So if you choose not to see, no one can make you see. You can remain in your state of darkness, but this is the truth. It's been widely reported. With Hamas, I go on to say, as a foil, Prime Minister Netanyahu feigned support for a two-state solution while enabling Israeli settlers to lay claim to land intended for a Palestinian state. My God. Feigning, pretending to want to support a two-state solution, while all along the way enabling settlers to lay claim to land intended for a Palestinian state. Mr. President, what President Truman did for Israel unilaterally in 1948, I emphasize unilaterally because remember, Prime Minister Netanyahu says, can't be unilateral. Israel has to agree for the Palestinians to have a state. Israel has a state, has had a state since 1948. Palestinians are stateless. Mr. President, what President Truman, Mr. President is President Biden, if I may just substitute, President Biden, what President Truman did for Israel unilaterally in 1948, we can do unilaterally for Palestinians. Now, I am an avant-garde personality. I'm usually out ahead of the rest of the pack. This is going to come to fruition. It's just a matter of time. And when it does, the memory of this message will be clouded because there will be people chosen to bring the message when it is thought to be safe to bring the message. They will wait to see how safe is it for us to say these words and to come forth publicly and proclaim that there can be unilateral recognition. They have to wait. So I am the canary in the coal mine, and they'll be waiting to see how I am reacted to, and that's being kind. I continue by saying we should not allow a party feigning, pretending, that's parenthetically said, we should not allow a party feigning to negotiate in good faith to prevent our good faith unilateral recognition of a Palestinian state. If we are acting in good faith, if we know that the Palestinians deserve a state, yes, there will be an interregnum. And while we're in that interregnum, there ought to be negotiations between people of goodwill who believe that there ought to be a Palestinian state. That the genesis of it is to a certain extent now, but that when the interregnum occurs, in full-blown interregnum, then we ought to make sure that we are on the right side, not just of history. It's a wonderful thing to be on the right side of history, but it's a better thing to be on the right side of righteousness, on the right side of saying you don't kill babies in the tens of thousands and think you're doing the right thing. The right side of righteousness. You don't just decimate the homes and schools and churches, synagogues, and properties of people, mosques, if you will. Don't just decimate those things and say, we did it because it was a just thing to do. And injustice in the name of justice is still an injustice. So be on the right side of righteousness. Act in good faith. And let's develop a Palestinian state. And we don't have to do it with the consent of Mr. Netanyahu, Prime Minister Netanyahu. We don't have to do it with his consent. President Truman didn't have anybody's consent. He was the President of the United States of America. Mr. President, I don't have to remind you who you are. You know. But as the President of the United States of America, you don't need anybody's permission to recognize a Palestinian state. And you sure should not rely on the permission of Prime Minister Netanyahu, who has been feigning, pretending to want a two-state solution while enabling Hamas. There's a lot more to be said about that, and I'll get to that in another message. I indicate in my letter to the President, lastly, in the name of mercy, I believe we must send tens of billions, not millions, of dollars in humanitarian aid to Palestine, to Gaza, to the West Bank. I believe we have to send tens of billions. And I believe we have to be proud to say we're sending the money in humanitarian aid to people who need tens of billions in humanitarian aid. Now pay particular attention to the words I'm about to say. To people who need tens of billions of dollars in humanitarian aid, because our fingerprints are all over what you've seen in these pictures. Our fingerprints are all over this. Our money has made this possible. We have a debt to righteousness. We ought to pay our debt to righteousness. Send tens of billions and be proud. Don't have to hide it in some bill. Don't have to announce that, well, we're going to send money to Ukraine, which I've supported. We're going to send money to Taiwan and the people in that area, Pacific Islanders, I've supported. But never say we're going to send money to the Palestinians. We're going to send money to Israel, which I have supported. As a matter of fact, the number exceeds $50 billion that I've supported to Israel. So if we're going to say we're going to send money to Ukraine and to Taiwan and to Israel, why can't we say we want to send money to the people who are suffering this injustice perpetrated by the Prime Minister of Israel with dollars, tax dollars from American citizens and other persons in this country who pay taxes, sales taxes, gasoline taxes. These tax dollars, I know it makes you uncomfortable, and you ought to be uncomfortable. These tax dollars have created this circumstance. Someone would say, well, no, those tax dollars weren't used for that. They were used for other purposes. But as my colleagues across the aisle like to remind me, there's something called fungibility. These dollars, fungible. They make it possible, if you have these dollars for one thing, then you can use your own dollars for other things. Hamas was wrong. Shouldn't have done what they did. Ought to be punished for what they did. Are being punished for what they did. But it's wrong for Mr. Netanyahu to kill tens of thousands, babies, innocent men, women, and children, an injustice of horrific proportions. And someone would say, well, why would you expect Israel to, why wouldn't you expect Israel to do what it's doing? After all, Hamas did a dastardly thing. Well, I am one of those people who believes that Israel is special. I don't expect people who have suffered the Holocaust to impose this. I don't expect it. I expect them to understand that you don't do this. That's my expectation. I believe that we have a duty to ourselves to speak truth not only to power, but about power. It's easy to speak truth to power. You say, power, there's a problem, we need to solve it. But it's difficult to say to power, when you're speaking truth about it, power, there's a problem, and you're it. Mr. Netanyahu, Prime Minister, there's a problem, and you are it. You got to stop killing these babies. Silence can help you collect your thoughts. Stop it. Now. Lastly, I say in the name of mercy, I believe we must send tens of billions, not millions, of dollars in humanitarian aid to Palestine. As our largesse to Israel has enabled the decimation of Gaza, as well as the estimated deaths of tens of thousands of innocent Palestinian men, women, and especially children. Now, if you can live with yourself and the knowledge that tens of thousands of innocent people are being killed, allow me to live with myself believing that it's an injustice. It is an injustice to do what's being done in the name of justice. I go on to close by saying, in closing, I respectfully and kindly make this appeal in the name of justice and mercy for the thousands of innocent Palestinian men, women, and especially children who have been injured, killed, or had their homes destroyed with munitions bearing our fingerprints. Munitions bearing our fingerprints. This is my letter that I have sent to the President of the United States. I signed it as a member of Congress, as the progenitor of August the 20th as Slavery Remembrance Day, as a scion of the enslaved Africans, sacrificed to make America great. I believe that the greatness of America will not be measured by the number of battleships that we have, the number of bombers, high-flying, stealth technology. Won't be measured by the number of billionaires we produce. The greatness of America won't be measured by how we treat people who live in the suites of life, in places where all is well. Dr. King mentioned to us that the truest measure, and I'm paraphrasing, the truest measure of a person, and I would now add the truest measure of a country, Dr. King, but he said the truest measure of a person is not where you stand in times of comfort and convenience. He didn't say what I'm about to say now. Not when all is well with you, when you're the leading country in the world, when you've got billionaires and persons of great opulence doing well. It won't be measured by where you stand in times of comfort. But the question that Dr. King mentions in his statement is, where do you stand in times of challenge and controversy? His statement was, the truest measure of the person is not where do you stand in times of comfort and convenience, but where do you stand in times of challenge and controversy? In these times of challenge and controversy, the United States of America ought to stand for justice for all. That would include this baby. United States of America ought to stand for liberty for all, liberty and justice for all. That would include the Palestinian people. The truest measure of a nation is not about the height of our buildings, not about the billionaires, but about where we stand when we have the opportunity to stand for righteousness, not just justice, but righteousness. Here is our righteous cause, the United States of America. This is it. Do not allow yourselves to succumb to the notion that the killing of these babies is a form of justice. It was my honor to be present last night when the President delivered his State of the Union address. He said many things, but I've spoken to you about the thing that was important today. That doesn't mean that all of the other things that he said were not important. It does mean that I've singled out something to talk about today. And I want to thank the President for what he said and for his belief that a two-state solution is the means by which we can achieve the ultimate peace that we seek in the area that we call Palestine, wherein Israel now exists. And by the way, I've said Israel has a right to exist. So, Mr. Speaker, I want to thank you for the time. I'm going to do what I customarily do when I finish this. For those who are new to hearing Al Green speak and noticing, I always go over and shake the speaker's hand. Something to be said when you express your appreciation. I shall do so. And I thank all of you for allowing me to share my thoughts with you. And injustice, in the name of justice, is still an injustice. And I yield back the balance of my time.
Members are reminded to direct their remarks to the chair. Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 9th, 2023, the gentleman from Arkansas, Mr. Hill, is recognized for 60 minutes as the designee of the Majority Leader.
Well, I thank the Speaker for the time. And as we witnessed President Biden's State of the Union speech last night in this historic House chamber, the gallery was filled with families that are in mourning, Mr. Speaker. They're in mourning because their loved ones are captive by a rogue terror group or by an authoritarian country or by a nation not living up to the rule of law. Some 56 Americans, Mr. Speaker, are held wrongfully detained by another country or by a terror group. And this week, we had many of those families in the gallery last night. We had the parents of Evan Gershkovich, the Wall Street Journal reporter, held in Russia. We had families whose loved ones are somewhere in Gaza, held by the terrorist group Hamas. Americans. And we don't know where they are or what their condition is. In last year's defense authorization bill, Congresswoman Haley Stevens and I created a provision that was passed by this House and by the Senate and signed into law by President Biden that designates March 9th, tomorrow, Mr. Speaker, as U.S. Hostage and Wrongful Detainee Day. So it's perfectly appropriate that last night in this gallery, those families came. Why March 9th? The death of Bob Levinson, the longest held American held hostage abroad. And this week, Congresswoman Stevens and I met with the Foley Foundation, the McCain Institute, who are working mightily with members of Congress, with our diplomats, to free those 56 Americans identified as being held illegally and wrongfully abroad. Haley and I met with Sagu Dinkel Chen's family, one of the Hamas, I hope to say, hostages, not a victim in Hamas. We met with the family of Zach Shaheen, held by the United Arab Emirates for the past 16 years. We met with the family of Kai Li, held in a Shanghai prison. The countries that hold Americans wrongfully are many. And I think it's important that this House keep those families top of mind every day. In my office, Mr. Speaker, I have a beautiful inlaid box from Syria, a custom in their country, and it's dedicated to Maj Kamalmaz, formerly a constituent of mine in Little Rock. His family now lives in North Texas. He is in Syria, somewhere in one of Assad's jail. So, Mr. Speaker, we need to constantly remember these families and America's obligation to not leave Americans held wrongfully detained abroad and reunite them with their family. It's an obligation of our country. It's an obligation of this legislative branch. And we are committed to working with the administration to bring them home. Mr. Speaker, there are Americans held in Iran. And Iran is a country that Americans need to focus on because it's intricately related to everything that we see in our news. The mullahs in Tehran are on the march against peace and prosperity in Europe, the United States, the Middle East, across the globe. And today, I want to put a human face on that march of terror and partnership in terror across the globe. I remember Serena Esmaila Seda, who was wrongfully beaten to death by the Islamic Republic security forces in 2022. Serena was, Mr. Speaker, just 16 years old. Like young people all over the world, young people in our gallery today, young people listening in America today, Serena was an avid social media user. She began to upload vlogs of her volleyball, singing, and enjoying life. As she posted, she was seen breaking the rules set by the Iranian regime, including not wearing a hijab, singing, expressing opinions openly as a woman. Serena said herself that she understood the stakes of posting these videos, but she did not let that scare her. What an inspiration to young people across the globe. In one of her videos, she said, "Why should my life be so different from teenagers in Berlin or New York just because I was born in Iran?" And when referencing all that, it's banned for women, but not for men in Iran. And so in September of 2022, she took to the streets in courage and alongside hundreds of others protested the Iranian regime. During the protest, she was beaten to death by the Islamic Republic's security forces. All she wanted was to create an Iran that represented fully the Iranian people. Her dreams were to make the most of her life, but under the rule of the Iranian regime, this is impossible. Iran is the world's #1 state sponsor of terrorism, and their barbarism spreads across far from their borders, Mr. Speaker, and Americans witness it every day. Iran has a stated purpose of wiping Israel off the map, destroying it as a country, wiping out the people. That's a stated goal of the nation of Iran, led by the mullahs there. They're backing Hamas financially, Hamas with training in Gaza on the attack. They back Hezbollah in southern Lebanon in their attacks on the northern part of Israel. Iranian proxy forces, the Houthis are disrupting global shipping in the Red Sea, affecting goods and supplies coming to Europe, coming to the U.S. The Houthis are disrupting that shipping. Who backs them? Iran. Who gives them targeting advice? Iran. Who gives them the missiles to attack ships in open navigation? Iran. Who is supplying the drones, Mr. Speaker, to Russia to aid the invasion of Russia of its sovereign neighbor, Ukraine? The murder and mayhem daily across the nation of Ukraine? Where is that munition coming from? Where are those drones coming from? Iran. Who threatened to murder Americans, like former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, here in the United States? Proxies of Iran. The constant attacks on U.S. personnel and our allies in Iraq and Syria. Who's making the attacks? Proxy militias from Iran. All of this culminating in their desire for a nuclear weapon to change the balance of power in the world. Iran is behind all of this. Their brutality should not be tolerated by Western countries who believe in the security in the region, and as my good friend from Texas just talked about, the basic human rights that we stand for in this country. We must continue to press this regime further, not fund it, as is the case of the Biden administration, freeing up billions of dollars to Iran for their use. And it isn't a peaceful use, I can assure you, Mr. Speaker. We must continue to press the regime. Iran's reign of terror against its own citizens like Serena, they're exporting that terror around the Middle East into the Red Sea, is destabilizing and is damaging to a peaceful future, not only for prosperity in the Middle East, but across the globe. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to congratulate Buck Lane, a good friend, on his retirement from the Searcy, Arkansas Regional Chamber of Commerce. Buck joined the chamber in February of 1991 after applying for an executive vice president position. He then went on to give 33 years of dedicated service and hard work for the betterment of the Searcy community, serving as president and CEO of the chamber most recently. During his time at the chamber, Buck has made impressive strides to build economic development strategy and produce new jobs and careers for all the citizens in Searcy and White County. From expanding existing companies in the city to bringing new ones, Buck had significant accomplishments. I congratulate him for his outstanding work in Searcy. I thank him for our years of collaboration, and I wish him the best in his retirement. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to remember the life of Arkansas Chief Deputy Attorney General Bob Brooks. Bob passed away suddenly after a brief illness February 11th. Bob was beloved by Democrats and Republicans, old and young, in Arkansas. He was a graduate of the University of Arkansas and the Tulsa College of Law. He served as chief of staff for longtime Arkansas Congressman Jay Dickey, and he led in our state as Governor Huckabee's director of the Arkansas Ethics Commission. Most recently, he served Tim Griffin as Arkansas's Chief Deputy Attorney General. He loved his job so much, and it was always hard, Attorney General Griffin tells me, to get him to go home each night as the office closed. Bob was a dedicated public servant who represented all that's good in Arkansas through his professionalism, his wit, and his great sense of humor. I remember Bob for his selfish commitment to public service, his long desire to get back to Arkansas to be in a dream job, and I thank him and his memory for our warm 2 decades of friendship. Martha and I are praying for his friends, his family, his loved ones during this difficult time. Bob will be missed dearly by many. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to congratulate Senior Airman Danielle Zimbia. Danielle was recently announced as a recipient of the Air Force's 2023 GEICO Military Service Award. This annual award is given to one enlisted member from each of the 6 service branches and the National Guard for their achievements and contributions to their men and women they serve with. She did an outstanding job in her training. She deserves this award. It's a great recognition of her commitment to the Air Force and to her fellow airmen and airwomen. And I congratulate her on this important accomplishment. Mr. Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time.
Yeah, they weren't expecting that. Yeah, Grotham's not here. They weren't expecting Mr. Wall. Yeah, I mean, he's not here. Yeah. We'll have to adjourn it.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Arkansas seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I do now move that the House adjourn.
The question is on the motion to adjourn. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The motion is adopted. Accordingly, the House stands adjourned until noon on Monday next for morning hour debate.